The legendary 80 series Land Cruiser. Built to last forever. Well, almost forever.
It has a secret. Axle has a little rust problem.
And this is where the trouble starts. The upper link bracket is gone. But that's not the only problem.
It's also thin here.
Yes, this axle got a serious rust problem. One good bump and the axle could have checked out. So the plan is to remove the axle, cutting the old crusty bracket off and building a new one. And while we are in here, here's the thing nobody tells you. When lifting an 80 series, it's not just springs and shocks, because
all the upper links, the lower links and the panhard, it is everything out of the middle. It starts to pull the axle in one direction. In this case, to the right side.
So the real question is, can we save this axle? Or is it the beginning of a much bigger nightmare?
Actually, this Land Cruiser looks fantastic from the look of it, but we have a little problem. If we look onto the axle, the bracket of the upper link is ripped off.
That's crazy. How does that happen?
I think the brackets on the upper links, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Austria, I say probably said 100 times, rust is a big problem. And it started to rust from the inside, so it got weaker and weaker. And then the guy who owns the car did an off-road tour. Actually, the ABS, so the anti-blocking system the light started to go on the dash. Yeah, the bracket was ripped off. And why was the light coming on? Because the cable of the anti-blocking system runs over this bracket and it ripped off the cable. And now we will get the axle out, but as it always is on these old cars, there is always a surprise.
In order to fix the rusted bracket, we need to get it out. Therefore I use 2 jacks to get the rear up. After the rear is in the air, we need something to support it. May I introduce the mighty frame support? To make it work right away, we need some sort of cross brace. So a little bit of this and that and we're done. Now I need to figure out where I put the support, so the 80 can sit on it after the axle is removed.
The first thing we will do is disconnect the drive shaft on the 4 bolts. Then we will put something underneath the drive shaft so it doesn't hang down for like days now. And afterwards shocks and so on, but we will do it more or less step by step.
And as I mentioned before, I already know something is waiting for us.
Yeah, nice. So the pinion does leak, something entirely new. So we need also a new pinion seal. And we have a slight play in the pinion.
The blown seal is not the only thing I noticed.
And another thing on this car is actually really checked up. So I would say about 10 centimeters. What is 3.5 inch, and as I said on the 80 review video, about 2.5 inch, or actually around 2, between 2 and 2.5. Everything gets a little too short on these cars, and then everything is a little, yeah, let's say funny in there. All the upper links, the lower links and the panhard, it is everything out of the middle, because lower links should be straight or more or less straight to the bottom, and the upper links all on this car is like this, so they are actually too short. And same as with the panhard, there is no adjustable in it, so the axle is actually out of center. When you checked it up, yeah, put other springs in it, the body goes up, and then you have one point, and the second point of the panhard is on the axle. The distance gets bigger, and because the length of the panhard doesn't get more, it starts to pull the axle in one direction, in this case to the right side. And because there are such heavy duty springs in the rear, I assume it is, as on most 80s I know, a good bit out of center, and sure, it puts a lot of stress on the brackets too. It is not straight in there, and that just puts a lot of stress on the bracket, but that bracket, I assume, we will see it when I put it out, is ripped up because of rust and not because the rear is high. but that's just a side thing. When you lift upper 80, it's not just shocks and coils. You need at least adjustable palm hearts to pull the axle in the middle again. And if it's really high in the rear, you need adjustable upper links and actually lower links too. They get too short.
With that out of the way, it's time to remove the stabilizer and the shocks.
I actually unbolted the shocks, so you can't move the shocks. I mean, I could pry on it with a bar, but that would dent the shock. What you see here is the shock is fully extended. And why is that? The shock is fully extended because there is no limiting strap on it. If the axle goes to full drop, the limiting straps are actually the shock absorbers, what is not that good, because if there is a lot of force, you could rip out the piston of it. The same is with the upper axle bump stops. They're the original one. That car for sure flexes like hell, but the limiting thing without lengthened stops and limiting straps are always the shock absorbers, so they have to, they get a lot of punishment. Should be not like that, but as I said, it is not just done with springs and shocks.
And the shocks are made to absorb impact and not to limit axle travel. Now I check the axle a bit up to get the shocks out. After the shocks, it's time to remove the handbrake cable, which is done pretty easily. After removing the pins, we can simply slide it out. The springs are finally moving and there is not much left before we can get the axle out.
We have to disconnect the anti-blocking system and the locker and also the brake line, and afterwards it just hangs on one arm because the second arm is not on it anymore, and the lower arms, and she is out.
While I disconnect the anti-blocking system, you can see how much dirt is built up in the rear. After lowering the jacks, the springs are finally out. The locker is next up. Here we just take off the cover and disconnect it. Now the panel brake lines and the leftover upper link needs to go.
I disassembled most of the axle. The only thing left is actually the lower links. This ones. I will disconnect the lower links on the frame, just that it is easier to access than down on the bottom, especially when you do not work with a lift, but the lift is not actually necessary to get an axle out on a 80 series Land Cruiser.
It's showtime. After removing the lower links, we can finally pull out the axle and take a closer look at it. The upper link bracket is definitely rusted to hell. That's not the only thing we will discover.
The axle is out, and why it ripped off? Because of rust. So it was so thin at some point that it just ripped off when he flexed the car. The second one, because it is open to the rear, is actually good. There is no rust nowhere on the inside. What will happen next? I will bring the axle to the sandblaster. Sure, I will strip off all the electronic parts and the brakes, so nothing is dead afterwards. Then the thing gets sandblasted, so we get all the rust out. Then we will make a new bracket.
But now it's time to get the axle to the sandblaster.
And why did I sandblast the axle? Because there was so much, let's say, gunk on it, so underbody carriage, the black stuff, but not the high quality one, the cheap one, the sticky one, and they sprayed it right over the rust on the axle. And now after sandblasting, you see here and there she is not deeply rusted but rusted. And it was just the easiest thing to sandblast the axle and paint it afterwards nicely black after I put the bracket on. But that's the reason why I did the sandblasting. When we are at the shop, we take a closer look at it and we will see what the axle actually has.
After a short drive, we are back at the shop and we can finally take a closer look on the axle. I would say it looks pretty good, beside the little thing right here. Let's get this thing off the pickup so we can finally work on it.
After unloading the axles, we will take a closer look. What we see now after the sandblasting, before you saw actually nothing because it was so gunked. And it is a prime example of 80 series rear axle. So if we look closer, they are all gunked. Like all, especially here, around here in Austria. So what we see now here. Here we have the right side bracket for the upper link. Here we have the remains of the left side brackets. If we look closer into the bracket, we can still see after sandblasting that there is black gunk in it. There are actually drainage holes in the brackets, but at some point they are just closed and then there is dirt in it. It will not come out, and then comes the next layer of dirt, the next layer of dirt, and at some point that whole thing just rusts off, and then you flex the car and it shears off. So, and also what we see here, we see here the axle tube, what is a two-piece pressed part, but when we look inside the bracket we see that the axle tube actually is thin, because it had enough time to rust. What I will do afterwards, when I make the new bracket, I will get all that old shit away and then we'll start to weld layer on layer on the axle and just grind it down so we have again the full thickness. What we also see is like backing plates. They are rusted through, and we have to, even after sandblasting, we have to clean some parts manually. Bracket is the main job. The other thing on the axle is actually it needs a rebuild, because as we know the pinion seal is shot. We see here on the pinion nut was probably open 1, 2, 3 times, because there are 3 markings someone took to secure it. So I assume the axle nut was already open 2 or 3 times and it is already, let's say, siphing again. So I assume there happened something, or there was dirt in it or whatever. But our main job now is the bracket and get the axle in, because all the stuff we have to do to get it rebuilt we can also do in the car. But the main thing is now the bracket, and then paint and then get it in. And everything else we can do afterwards.
For now we need to get all this black gunk off. Even though it was sandblasted, you can clearly see how much stayed on the axle. If we would paint over this, it would chip in no time.
A little side thing here. So, like mentioned before, here sits the spring. That cavity, wax, epoxy thing is all over here. So you can get in with the drill, but this axle is almost 30 years old, and now you can see the older these cars get, the more you need to invest in, because in reality we should take everything apart. So open every spot weld, taking it apart, but also with that upper link, in reality you would need to open all the welds around here, lift it up, because it will also be a little bit thin down here. Same here, spring mount, open it, get under it. We will do it, sorry for the rain, as best as possible, of course, and get everything out of the way, because the more precise we work here, the better the outcome will be on that axle. But as mentioned, you would really need to just get all those attachments out of the way and yeah, just overhaul it. But yeah, that's just a side note.
Finally, the remains of the brackets come off. While removing it, I'm extra careful here, because I don't want to damage the axle any further. And there are the remains of the upper link bracket. I would say it's pretty weak, no wonder it snapped that easily. After removing the bracket, I will clean up the spot and get an overview on how bad it actually is. And it doesn't look good. I would say there is a bit of material missing.
And what we now can see is, if we look around here in the axle, it is thin. The dirt had more than enough time to not only rot away the bracket, it also did rot away the axle tube. And what I do now is I put weld over weld over weld over it. So I fill it up, grind it down until we have the same height as the rest of the axle tube to fill up the material what was or is rusted away. And afterwards I will start to build a bracket, a new one, and then weld it on. Sounds easy, but takes time.
In order to repair the axle, I put my welder on around 100 amps and weld it like this. I start from the outside and work my way in. We need to be extra careful here, because due to the sheer size that needs to be welded, things can go from bad to worse. Always check the heat on the axle tube while you're welding. After the axle got its thickness back, we need to grind the weld down. And look at this, after 2 hours the axle finally got its thickness back. Now I remove the remaining part of the bracket that stayed on the upper link, in order to build a template for the new one. I tack weld the old bracket together to get a shape. Plus, I'm using a sheet metal piece that got the exact thickness of the bracket. First thing we do is to copy the outer parts, and then we will move on the front and back plate.
So I did cut out the first piece. What is now, I will have to grind, drill holes, cut out another 3 templates, and it will be all the same. It is just a very time consuming work. And yeah, I probably will, I don't want to say the F word, but it will take some time to get everything done. Then tack weld the bracket together, then fit the axle into the car, and then put the bracket on. But the next thing you will see, because I will save you the time of watching me grinding, is the bracket.
After we grinded the new template, it's time to drill the holes for the link. Let's see how it fits. After aligning everything, I welded all 4 pieces together. I would say we have done a pretty good job here. In comparison, there is the old crusty rusty one next to our new bracket. But why did we put the axle back in?
As I said, it will take plenty of time to make the bracket. There is the bracket. When we look at the bracket, actually the original bracket, or the remains of it, the original bracket is a 2-part piece. What it means, the middle is welded in and the rest is a bent piece actually. I made it out of 4 pieces. I did cut out 4 plates. When I welded it, I had a rod in here so it doesn't bend, and it is actually big enough to fit the upper control arm. And what we do now is, as you see, I put in already the axle. I had to put in the axle because when I weld it in, I want that it is on the original positioner and not off by like 3 or 4 or 5 millimeters. I connected all 4 control arms, the 2 lower ones and the 2 upper ones. So I have the position, I have no springs in. Then I looked that the axle is straight in the car, and now I will put in the bracket, put the bolt through it and tack weld it on the axle. Afterwards I will get the axle out again, weld it through. What is actually pretty common in Austria on 80s, 90s and 100s. They just rip off. That is just daily business here.
This is really the only way to get the bracket into a perfect position. So we attach the upper link to the bracket and put it in place. It's time to grab my welder and tack weld it. Now we need to lower the axle back down so we can weld it through. Before I weld it, I put the strut back into the bracket as a safety. Reason being, due to the heat while we weld it, we don't want to have any problems with welding distortions. It should stay right where it is. And now it's time to finish it off. I would say the job is finished. Only thing that remains is we need to put the bracket for the handbrake cable back on. It's pretty simple. We can take the old one and weld it on. And now also the remaining welds are finished. And the axle is back to its former glory. I hope you like it as much as I do.
Actually everything is now welded and that's holed on the axle and we are done. What comes next actually you will not see is how I paint the axle, but it is just painting. We just paint it, get it back in, tighten everything and that's it. And actually I talked to the owner about the bearings in the axle. We will do for now just the bracket, and because here it is not winter already and the car is still in use and it stands in the winter time, so we will redo all the bearings in the winter time. And yeah, major thing was the bracket. We put on a new bracket so we can drive with the car and everything is safe.
And that's pretty much it. We painted the axle and put it back in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave a like and subscribe. Until next time.
Stop myself for a while.